back to the Caffeinated Christian Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Pastor Mike Wrigglesworth, and today we're diving into a message that I preached on March 30th of 2025. And this is part of a broader sermon series on the book of Ecclesiastes. This is a book that doesn't just challenge the way we think, it challenges the way that we live our lives. But let's be honest, the world is full of bite-sized wisdom, easy-to-share quotes, and feel-good inspiration. But what if this so-called wisdom that we consume is actually shaping us in ways that we don't fully realize? In Ecclesiastes 7, King Solomon drops some hard truths that sound completely upside down to the modern listener. Like, why does he say things like the day of death is better than the day of birth? That sorrow is better than laughter? That wisdom is found not in celebration but in the house of mourning? At first it sounds rather unsettling, maybe even offensive to some of us. But what if this ancient wisdom holds the key to a life of deeper meaning? And so in today's episode, we're going to unpack what it truly means to walk the way of wisdom and how Solomon's words reshape our perspective on things like success and legacy and what truly matters. So find a comfortable spot with your favorite caffeinated beverage, enjoy the message, and if you want to hear more messages in this series, check out the Centerpoint Community Church YouTube channel, linked in today's show notes. Now let's jump in.
I find it interesting how our digital world is just chock full of like conventional bits of wisdom, right? These quotes that we find online that we generally accept as true. So they're inspirational, they're motivational, they make us feel good. Quotes like, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Or, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." Or my personal favorite, "If you're always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be." I know some people that should try to be a little bit more normal. Let's just say, okay. But when you're mindlessly scrolling on Facebook or on Instagram, you'll come across quotes like these, right? And they get traction because they're shareable, they're memorable, they're motivational, and they appeal to this desire inside of us to chase after our dreams, to believe that we could accomplish something big, to not conform to societal norms. And listen, there's some measure of truth in these things. That's why we're drawn to them in the first place. But I do believe that it's easier for you and me to consume philosophies that appeal to how we live in the here and now, and we chase our dreams, our desires, our expectations, rather than wisdom that helps us to keep eternity in mind. Okay? Tell me the last time you heard a quote like this or saw a quote like this on your Instagram or Facebook feed. The day of death is better than the day of birth. Anyone? No? Anyone? Sorrow is better than better than laughter. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning. Those show up? Yeah, probably never. Right? When was the last time you saw that as the verse of the day on your Bible app? Again, probably never. And if you're hearing it and you're thinking, all right, I don't know what all of that means, but I don't feel good when I hear it. All right? Because what that is it's gritty, raw, unvarnished, weathered by the storms of life sort of wisdom. And if you followed us at all in this series, you know that Ecclesiastes, this book we've been exploring, is this brutally honest book about the fleeting nature of life. Right? Throughout the book is this word meaningless or vanity, depending on your translation. It's from the Hebrew word havel. And havel does not mean all things have no meaning and it's without purpose. It means all things are fleeting and short-lived in this life. And the author, who many believe to be King Solomon, is telling us that everything in life that we experience and enjoy has an expiration date to it. And what Solomon does, as he continues on with this theme, he delivers us this ancient, hard-won, battle-tested wisdom. So if you have a Bible, whether it is a book or it's a glowing screen, you can turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, starting in verse 1. Here's how it reads. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. A good name is better than precious ointment. Some translations say a good name is better than fine perfume. Simply put, a good name is better than a good scent. Now, that doesn't mean you get to slack on personal hygiene, okay? That, like deodorant and showers, those things matter. But Solomon's point is that your name actually means something. It matters. And throughout Scripture, what I find fascinating is that God will periodically give someone a new name, whether it's Abram to Abraham, or his wife Sarai to Sarah, or Jacob to Israel, or Simon to Peter, if we're looking in the New Testament. And the Hebrew word name is the word Shem. And the meaning of this word does not stop at what is on your birth certificate. Your Shem is your reputation. Your Shem is your character. Because a new name in the Bible denoted a new path in life, a new trajectory, a new identity. Put another way, your name referred to the overall story your life told. On the screen behind me is Alfred Nobel. Many of you may know him as the namesake of the Nobel Peace Prize. Right? And some of you may know that he is the inventor of dynamite. And what you may not know, though, is that in 1888, Alfred's brother Ludwig died, and a French newspaper accidentally published Alfred Nobel's obituary instead. Okay? Can you imagine somebody mistakenly writing and publishing your obituary? Can you imagine being the one who wrote it? Yeah, I bet he got fired. But here's how the headline of Alfred Nobel's obituary read. The merchant of death is dead. And the article went on to describe in detail how Nobel profited from war and from death and from destruction. And the story goes that this revelation, as he read his obituary, absolutely wrecked Nobel. And from then on, he used all the wealth that he had acquired to establish the Nobel Peace Prize, which of course honors people who seek to make the world better. Now, at least that's how the story goes. There's details in that story that are contested. There's articles and YouTube videos that say that's not exactly how it happened. But here's the point that I want to make. His obituary was actually published. His name, what he was known for, was put out there for the world to see. If he were to die that day, that's what he would have been known for. Known as somebody who did not promote peace, but promoted war. But that's what Shem is all about. It's all about the story that our life, by how we live, actually tells. Right? And I think it's important for us to know that as our life unfolds, and as our life is right here and right now, we would do well to ask ourselves, what story is our life telling? Because there will be a time where those around us are only left with memories of us. What will those memories be? Okay? And I think this is why Solomon puts this idea of a good name together with the day of death. I don't think it's any coincidence. Because at birth, there is unwritten potential ahead of you. And at death, there is a written legacy behind you. Your reputation, your name, the story that your life ultimately tells. So what story is your life telling? And as we continue on, we're going to end at verse 14 today in Ecclesiastes 7. I think the various themes that we hit on throughout this text will point us back to the story that our lives tell. So let's keep going. He says this, "It is better to go into the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth." Okay. So, as we look at this section, I think we have to acknowledge there's some objections initially inside of us as we read it, at least for some of us. It's better to go into the house of mourning than to go into the house of feasting. It's better to be in sorrow than to experience laughter. I gotta be honest, when I read that section, I kind of struggled with that. How could Solomon think that these things are better? That we're better to walk into a funeral than to go to, let's say, a wedding party. So let's do this. I want to play a game. Maybe some of you have played this before. It's the game Would You Rather. All right? And if you don't know what Would You Rather is, it's typically when you're presented with two very bad options. Two things that you would not want to do, but you have to pick one. Okay? So, for example, you would say, would you rather be a millionaire and not be able to talk, or be poor and able to speak eloquently? Like something silly like that. And now, Solomon is presenting us with two scenarios where one is clearly, in our minds, better than the other. So, would you rather go to a funeral or go to a wedding reception? So raise your hand if you would rather go to a funeral. Okay, we got one. Two. We got two. Who would rather go to the wedding reception? I knew there was going to be one that would rather go to the funeral, right? Okay, so most of us were like, yeah, obviously, I'd rather go to a wedding, right? And I think we found those who are like super empathetic and want to be there to help people in their time of grief and all that stuff, and the two people that raised their hands, right? So, what's that? Right. But here's the point. The better option is not necessarily the preferred option, right? Let me give you another example. What's better? Ice cream or broccoli? What's better for you? All right? The broccoli is. But who would rather eat broccoli over ice cream? No one. Right? You? Okay, a couple people will. All right, you're ruining my point, okay? All right. The better option is not always the preferred option. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, it isn't. And that's generally true of life. But what makes a funeral, going into a house of mourning, better than going to something like a wedding reception or a party of any kind? Well, one is good and wonderful and celebratory, right? The other one, while not as pleasant in the moment, forces us to zoom out and see the bigger picture and to really consider what's most important in life, to actually get real about the path that our life is going down, and to be honest about the story that our life is actually telling. But death isn't a fun topic. It's taboo. It's easily avoided. There's immense cultural pressure to move on with any sort of grief that we're feeling and live our life. And we're so uncomfortable with death that there's even been some effort among the top 1% of our society to try to defy death altogether. There's a new documentary that came out earlier this year called Don't Die. And it chronicles the story of a very wealthy entrepreneur, Brian Johnson, who essentially has made it his goal to de-age himself and bring society to the point where they don't have to experience death at all. And so if you watch the hour-and-a-half documentary, you'll see him taking genetic enhancements, doing plasma swaps, following this extremely rigid plant-based diet, and taking 100 supplements a day. Now, most of us are not going to do what Brian Johnson does. But this highlights the overall societal distaste for death, right? Even us saying, I'd rather go to a wedding party than go to a funeral, right? We don't like it. And we might not do what Brian Johnson did and go crazy with supplements and just eating a vegetarian diet, but we do our own things, whether it's drinking too much or spending too much or scrolling too much or eating too much or working too much. It's all an attempt to distance ourselves from the realities of death. But when we enter into the house of mourning, as Solomon describes it, it's not pleasant, it's difficult. But I firmly believe it's an invitation from the God who loves us to consider the deeper and more important things in life and to consider the story that we're telling right now. Saint Benedict, one of the early church fathers, he said to his followers, "Keep death daily before your eyes." There's a Latin phrase, memento mori, which means remember that you will die. But we expend so much energy and effort trying to avoid the unpleasant thoughts and emotions that come by going into the house of mourning. We try to avoid sadness, so we chase distractions and chase every dopamine hit that we can find, when in reality, sitting in sorrow, which is this emotional response to injustice and wrongdoing in our world, that presents to us the greatest potential for growth. You see, sorrow is this crucible for spiritual formation. It's a crucible for spiritual formation, and we would do well to take these as invitations from the God who loves us. It's one of the catalysts that he uses to shape us into somebody who looks more and more and more like Jesus. And think about it. During the times of ease and comfort in your life, spiritually, it's incredibly easy to become complacent and lethargic. But it's in those moments of unexpected tragedy and deep and abiding pain that God uses those moments to shake us awake and make us aware of his presence. And I know that doesn't make us feel any better, but the fact is we live in a culture that has a natural resistance towards sorrow because we have this mistaken assumption that joy and sorrow are oppositional to one another, when in reality, they're not. They're not. I believe joy and sorrow can very much work in tandem with each other. You ever notice that some of the things that you derive joy and pleasure from are also the things that cause you some pain and sorrow? Right? If you have any meaningful relationship with another human being, you know this is true. And the opposite is true. The things that can cause us anger and grief initially can also take us into places of deep joy. I know a few weeks ago I shared our own experience of navigating the death of our son Joshua. And we experienced deep grief, but as we walked through it and processed that together as a couple, we also experienced this deep solidarity with one another, and there's some deep joy that came out of that I don't think we could have experienced had we not walked through those seasons of deep sorrow. So I want to challenge you to think about this a little bit differently. When Solomon says, through the sadness of the face, the heart is made glad. I wonder if God wasn't cluing Solomon into this reality that joy and sorrow come from the same place, and they are not, in fact, oppositional to one another. And that when we look at the life of Jesus, he experienced the full measure of sorrow. He's called the man of sorrows. He experienced every single sorrow imaginable. But he was also a man of deep joy. So we have to be mindful of that, and that as we're pursuing Jesus, when we experience the abundant life that Jesus invites us to, we'll experience sorrow, but we'll also experience a lot of joy too. Through the sadness of face, the heart is made glad. Continuing on. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fools. This also is vanity. So talking about death is probably among the top 10 things that we don't want to talk about. And receiving correction in any form is probably on that list as well. I'm willing to guess. We would rather much receive compliments all the time than receive correction at any time. But the story that we tell with our lives is also reflected in our ability to receive wise correction. It's better to hear a rebuke, okay, than to hear the songs of fools, right? Now, this word rebuke, in the original Hebrew, it was used mostly in economic settings, right? So if a merchant was caught using dishonest scales to, let's say, weigh grain, and a customer noticed it, he or she would call out the merchant and say, "This is not fair, you're cheating people." That's a rebuke, right? It's a call to integrity, right? A rebuke is just simply when you are called out for something that you did. So say a manager is catches an employee inflating his work hours, and he says, "Hey, you got to be honest. You can't do that or else you're going to lose your job." That's a rebuke. It's a call for integrity. Say a friend posts misleading or false information online, and you call them out and say, "Hey, we have to be careful about the things that we post." That's a rebuke. Or you catch your son or daughter lying about completing their homework, and you say, "You have to be honest with me. You can't lie about these things." That's a rebuke. And no one likes that. No one likes getting called out. But the truth is, walking in the way of wisdom and growing into someone who looks more like Jesus is not always going to be fun. At times it's hard and it's grueling and it's uncomfortable. Getting called out doesn't feel great. But again, what does Solomon say? It is better for us. It is better. I love Proverbs 27, verse 6. It reads like this: "Faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy." I believe it's the NIV that puts it this way: wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. I think that's tantamount to heresy in our culture today, right? Like if you call somebody out for something that they did you believe is wrong, you're considered like a hater, right? And I think a rebuke needs to be done gently and carefully and wisely. How something's said is just as important as what is said. But let's be honest, either you or someone you know is likely sabotaging an opportunity to grow because they can't have hard things said to them. And I think it's far more concerning when we surround ourselves with people who only shower us with compliments and are never willing to offer us correction. You see, we prefer compliments, but we grow through correction. And it's a major part of the story that our life is ultimately going to tell. So a hard question we have to ask ourselves, that you have to ask yourself, is can I receive wise correction when it's given to me? Or do I immediately put up the defenses and start pushing back and try to justify myself? If it's the latter, then it's a heart issue that needs to be addressed between you and God. And some of you might be here and you've been given wise counsel and you know deep down it's right what the person is telling you, but you insist on doing it your own way. This is spiritual self-sabotage. Okay? We ruin our lives when we refuse to be corrected. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Okay? All right, continuing on in verse 7, here's how Solomon writes. He says, "Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart." So there's the realities of death and correction. And then we get into a little bit about what we do with the finite resources that God has given us with regard to our money. Now, Dr. Tom spent some time going over this last week, so I won't spend a ton of time here. But the story our lives tell is reflected in how we use our financial resources. Jesus tells us on no uncertain terms that where your money is, there your heart will also be. There's this invisible string that connects my wallet to my heart, and where one goes, the other will inevitably follow. And I think greed is this very sneaky and elusive force, and it's so easy to use it to justify our financial decisions. It's so easy to justify those things. But by taking a bribe, by living with greed in our hearts, by living in this reality that an allure for money can turn wise people into foolish people. The love of money can turn wise people into foolish people. We won't turn there, but I love how the Apostle Paul describes it in his letter to Timothy. He says, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And I believe Solomon understood this when he was writing this verse. And notice that Solomon writes about oppression and taking a bribe in the same verse. And I don't think it's any surprise that if you look at any injustice in our world, whatever it might be, do you ever notice how it always comes back to the fact that somebody is making a profit? Whether it's the abortion industry, or it's the human trafficking industry, or it's the pornography industry. Any injustice in this world, there's always someone making a profit behind it. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. A bribe corrupts the heart to do evil. Okay. Verse 8 through 10. Here's that word better again, right? Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. And the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. So Solomon is revisiting something that we've seen before. We saw it in Ecclesiastes 3. The idea of seasons, that things begin and things end. So we're brought back to this again here. And the truth is, things have a beginning and things have an ending. But we also know that there are things that end and we don't want them to end. We feel that they ended prematurely. And I think Solomon is telling us here that we shouldn't hold on to anger over something ending, but we should be patient as something new begins, right? But do you notice that nostalgia has been having a moment in our culture recently? That there's this longing to recapture a day that we used to live, a season that we used to be in, instead of embracing the moment that we're actually in right now. And I'm not trying to be critical of nostalgia, but I think there's a healthy balance to be found here. So when my wife and I were getting ready to go to the weekend to remember, last weekend, my mom brought over a box of my old toys that I had at my grandparents' house. And I had so much fun going through those old toys. I had like an old Flash toy that when you wind him up, he just makes it look like he's running really fast. I had a Professor X, most of them were superheroes. I had a Professor X action figure that for some reason I colored on his face to try to change his race and I put a beard on him. And so I had Egon Spengler from the Ghostbusters, had one of these action figures. And it was just awesome to pull out these old toys and be brought back to some of these memories of when my cousin would come over my grandma's house in the summer and we have play dates and all that stuff. Last night, my wife and I, we were at a fundraiser for Bornhava, her work, and we were at the Grapevine, and I had to get back a little bit early. And so I had turned the TV on to watch something real quick, and it goes to that screensaver where it automatically goes to our photo album. And all of these old pictures from when our kids were younger popped up, and I spent a good 20 minutes just going through those pictures, and it was a lot of fun. And so we should do that, right? But there's this quote that goes like this, and I'll make it my point here, that the past is a good place to visit, but it's not a good place to stay. The past is a good place to visit, but it's not a good place to stay. But it is so much fun going there from time to time, isn't it? So pull out the old toys, pull out the old games, pull out the old photo albums from the holidays, and look at those and regale in the memories and all of that. But it is not a good place for you and I to stay. So what Solomon does here is he warns us against romanticizing the good old days, right? We often tend to do that. I pastored a church where we had a lot of old people, and they would talk about the good old days as if mentally they were there. They couldn't get past it. But were they really the good old days, or do you just have selective memory? Just be honest. I love how Warren Wiersbe put it. He says, the good old days are a combination of a bad memory and a good imagination. Okay? It's true, okay? I don't write the mail, I just deliver it, okay? I'm just saying. All right, verse 11 through 12. Okay, so we're looking at death. We're looking at receiving correction. We're looking at greed. All of these things shape our story. He says, wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So Solomon, he was the richest man on the planet, even by today's standards. So I don't think it's any surprise that he revisits money in this collection of verses. And he makes a bold claim here. He claims that wisdom is a better defense in life than wealth. Wisdom will protect you better than your money will protect you. All wealth will do is insulate you for a period of time, but it cannot offer you the protection that wisdom does, because wisdom equips you with the ability to make good choices in life, wise choices in life. So Solomon is saying on no uncertain terms that wisdom is greater than wealth. There's a modern day case study in this. Some of you might know the story of Sam Bankman-Fried. He was the founder of the cryptocurrency exchange known as FTX. And just a few years ago, he was considered to be a financial genius. He amassed billions and billions of dollars. He was living the high life. His wealth insulated him from the normal challenges of life that us peons have to deal with, all right? So he had influence over politicians, over celebrities, over the financial world, you name it. But what he didn't have was oversight and accountability. And so he ends up misusing customer funds, and he ends up making these false public statements online. And practically overnight, this empire that he built collapsed and his billions evaporated. And now he's facing years and years of prison time. Wealth cannot protect you the way wisdom can protect you. Okay? Wisdom is greater than wealth. Wisdom is greater than wealth. And then finally, verse 13 and 14, and these verses encapsulate everything, help us to sort of land the plane today. Solomon writes, consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the day of adversity, consider. God has made one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. So what Solomon is doing here is he closes with this freeing but very real truth that God is sovereign over the good days and he's sovereign over the bad days. He says, who can make straight what God has made crooked? There will be things in our life that we wish unfolded differently. Circumstances that feel unfair. Moments of sorrow that we can't explain. Moments where we will try to use the things of this world at our disposal to try to straighten out the path that God has set in front of us, and He's made it a certain way. And they don't make sense to us. But Solomon reminds us in all of this that God is in control. And we love the idea that God gives us good days. And we don't like to admit the idea that God also allows the bad days. And Solomon isn't saying that God causes all suffering and hardship to occur and takes enjoyment in that, but rather to say that whether it's good or bad, there is nothing that is outside of His hands. The comfortable seasons and the hard seasons both serve a purpose, and God's love and grace and mercy towards you do not change. And the mountaintop experiences, they remind us of God's goodness and His mercy and His grace and His blessings. And the valleys, they remind us of our need for Him. Okay? So, we should take Solomon's wisdom seriously. And instead of trying to make our life easy and as comfortable as possible, we lean into the hard and refining work that sorrow brings. Instead of avoiding correction, we welcome the hard truths that shape us into people of wisdom. And we receive those words of correction. And instead of giving in to greed, we resist its gravitational pull and we choose to be generous with the resources God has given us. Instead of lamenting and getting angry over the end of a season in our life, we embrace the present moment that God has us in, trusting that He's good. And instead of resenting the crooked path that God has us on, we trust that He is still at work writing our story. Because you and I are living a story, whether we realize it or not. And Solomon's brutal, unvarnished, unfiltered wisdom will not show up on your Instagram feed. But it'll allow you to stop long enough to actually look at the story of your life and what it is telling. And ask whether your story has been caught up in this greater and grander story that God is telling through the gospel, through Jesus Christ. And what Solomon says is something that Jesus Himself would later echo, is that the good life is not always the easy life. And that the better way is not always the fun way, but it is always the way that ultimately leads to life. And so I will leave you with this question today, and this question we've been asking throughout this message today is, what story is your life telling? Because when your life is in the memory of people, they won't talk about how much money you had or how successful you were or how funny you were or any of those things. What they'll do is they'll talk about your name. They'll talk about your character, your reputation. They'll talk about the story that your life told and whether or not it pointed people to the greater story that's being told in Jesus. So let's pray.